Well, I came here after World War II under the GI Bill of Rights, and having been drafted right out of high school and then having to start my college after at the age of 21. And at that time, BG was primarily a teacher's college, and I think they had about 1,800 students, and about 70% of them were women. And then the GIs came in, and they became close to 3,000. We're no longer just a teacher's college, but we've become a university, and there was frankly, some feeling maybe that we shouldn't emphasize our origin. But I was one, and there were others who felt that we should be proud of the fact that we did begin as a teacher's normal school, really, and did prepare teachers. And then through that, the different departments developed, and we became a university, now a rather large university. And our pattern was similar to that experienced by a lot of other teachers' colleges in different parts of the United States. Well, in 1969, the College of Education moved into the general classroom building, which finally was called the Education Building. And the dean's office was up on the fourth floor. And there had been a little misunderstanding as to how large the reception area we needed at that time. And I may be sharing that blame because I was on the planning committee. I was interested in history, having been a history teacher, and was interested in some of the antiques or furniture or items that symbolized or reflected a period in our history. So we started out with a desk, which is a teacher's desk, which is in the north end of the Little Red Schoolhouse. And we also purchased a globe, which is sitting on the floor and should be on that desk, and a few other items, and had them in our reception area. And Dean Jensen went along with that, thought it was a good idea. And one day President Jerome came over to visit and was looking around, saw we had them, admired them. He said we should have a Little Red Schoolhouse on this East Campus at that time. And he looked at Dr. Jensen, and they agreed, and then they both looked at me and said, well, try to see if you can get one. So that's how it got involved from the administration standpoint. I think we raised $14,000 or $15,000 in about a year and a half, and I think we had got over 600 donors. So we figured our average gift was probably 10, 20. I mean, these were largely teachers. They weren't CEOs or financial people, but we were sort of stymied, and we were looking at schools in the county where we could move. And we did have one located that wasn't too far. It was out northwest of town. But we tried to get a mover who would move it. He said, well, a brick schoolhouse, if you notice, they usually have very little interior partitioning. And he said, I'm afraid we'll get a pile of bricks on a highway or a road when we're moving. So we couldn't do that. So we were sort of stuck there for 2 or 3 years. Well, we didn't know what we were going to do. And then the young lady came in by the name of Becky Linder, who was originally from Norwalk. She was a sophomore here in education. She had heard about our efforts and so forth. She said she had talked it over with her parents and with her aunt and uncle, and they had a vacated schoolhouse on their family farm, which was located at the intersection of Route 18, just off Route 20 at Norwalk, in the Norwalk area. And that if we wanted it, we could have it. So I mentioned it to Dr. Benson and to President Jerome. And at that time, the president was Dr. Moore, because Dr. Jerome had gone to Florida. And they said, well, check it out. So I had a committee of 2 or 3 of us. One was still a faculty member of music, Bill Alexander, and the other was a retired professor in education, Bill Jordan. We went over and we looked at it. We liked it because we liked the condition it was still in, even though it was going to need a lot of renovation. The style, it had the two entrances and so forth, one for the boys, one for the girls, and two different cloakrooms and all. And so we said, well, that's a possibility. Then during the next several years, we were trying to get money to move it. We couldn't raise enough. They said it was going to cost us one time $90,000, which back in the 70s was more than $90,000 is today as far as its availability. And we were stalled for a couple of years. And one night that I got a call from a representative, Art Wilkowski. Well, he called Dr. Heisler, who had been interested in the project, and Dr. Heisler was a faculty member and the student teacher supervisor, and he had three sons, and they were students at BGSU. And Dr. Heisler said, well, the boys and I are willing to tear it down if you get it, if you'll give us a truck and so forth and pay the expenses we'd have over there if you can afford it. Well, that was going to save us about another 15 or 20,000, so we were getting a little closer. But Representative Wilkowski had called him. He had heard about it, and he said, well, the first appropriations bill from the Ohio lottery is on the floor now, and I'm going to add an amendment for $50,000 for the Little Red Schoolhouse, which we were really surprised and pleased. And we did not know that Representative Wilkowski was from Toledo, had been a graduate of BGSU, and he had actually taught in a one-room school in Michigan for a short time before he went to law school and became a lawyer and then a legislator. So we got the money. So that would have been in 1975. Dr. Heisler and his sons, it was during the Easter break he started, and they spent 9 weekends. They'd go over on Friday evening, late afternoon, and they'd come back Sunday afternoon. And they did that to take this building down, the schoolhouse down, brick by brick. They salvaged as much as they could. Right in front of where we're sitting is the bell. Now that actually was the original bell that was, when we first looked at it, was in the cupola. One was a ketchup bottle that had the lid on it, and it's in the northeast corner in one of our display cases. It's still there. There was paper in it, but when they opened it, the paper disintegrated. So there's been a lot of speculation. Another thing that's rather unique, the blackboards. That's not slate. That's like a canvas, a cloth, and that's what the originals were, and they're painted black. So usually you'd think of slates and blackboards, but these are the original ones. You'll notice the pictures up there is that is Washington, and who would you expect normally to be with Washington? Lincoln, but it isn't. It's General Pershing, because he was a hero from World War I, and afterwards then they put him up there. We had a lot of teachers who came here in Bowling Green's early years, back in particularly the 20s and then even before that. They had been in one-room schools and gone to that, and then maybe high schools. We did in our collection had a copy of the State Superintendent of Public Instruction Journal for, I forget, 1830 some, not 1930 some, or that period, and said that 8th grader who's sitting there in the back of that room in a few years may be teaching in one-room school. And remember, in this building, they had from 20 to 25 or 30 pupils at a time, and that would be grades 1 through 8. Teachers either had to be tremendous or else, because when you have that age span and different ones, and it can be challenging just if you have a few, but to have that age range, it's really something that they wouldn't. They would come for the whole day. They would have, some of them would actually cook soup, have a kettle of soup going. they always had, like we have the water bucket or the water barrel. I mean, you had the recess time, you had the different games that they would play, they're common. Most of them walked. In fact, I think the way they had it designed, nobody had to walk more than 2 miles. But they didn't have buses or anything. Later, they had uh, sleds, or wagons that were drawn by horses. And wintertime, they'd even have like sleds that could go over the ice and snow. But generally, they tried to have a radius within 2 miles. Then when these teachers, as time went on, then they were trying to increase their preparation. So they would take work during the summer. A lot of them would come to Bowling Green. My mother was one. She'd gone to Miami University. We lived in central Ohio in Shelby County. She went to Miami a couple summers, and a lot of them would do that. And then they had a 2-year degree, which we had at first. It was a normal school. And as Don Wolfe, who used to write for the Toledo Blade, he used to every once in a while said he can remember back when Bowling Green was a normal school rather than a university, and did it sort of jokingly that things were normal at that time compared when we were having student unrest during the 60s and 70s. But they would do that, and they would eventually get their 2-year certificate. And then it wasn't really until after World War II that a lot of those were still working to get their 4-year degrees. Because when I first came here and worked in the dean's office in the early 60s, I had students, they were teachers, been teaching 20, 25 years, who were still working to get their 4-year teaching certificate. That they started out with a 2-year. But this was prevalent in a number of states, this pattern, where the schools became, they were important, they started them. You'd have the 1 room or 2. Now, my wife, she's from Huron County, and she went to one for 8 grades, and they had 2 rooms. So you had grades 1 through 4 in one, and then 4 through 8 in the other. And so there were combinations of that would be. And then eventually you had your high schools, and then they consolidated in the 50s, the high schools. But during that time, the relationship with the university is a lot of our state colleges and universities began as normal schools, teacher training schools for teachers coming out or going back to teach in 1-room schools. That's how a lot of them started. And then in the 20s, you started having some more legislation where you had the land grant, and then those became larger and became your real large universities like Ohio State and Penn State and those. And it was sort of interesting, the pattern of how the elementary, secondary ed had a relationship and correlation with the growth and evolution of higher ed. And why in some of the documents we had and some of the statements we made, we feel that the role of Bowling Green State University has been regional, although it's broader now, it's becoming national, becoming international. But its origin, and in the process, though, it dare not forget its regional commitments, and that it's gone hand in hand and developed. And we've been an example of many others that have done that in the country.